Let's say you're trying to figure out how to draw the portion of the image that's in this square. You could look at where the line of the spoon starts down at the bottom here, where it runs through this grid line here. So you could estimate that this seems to be a little bit above halfway. So you could go to your blank drawing and mark that. But if you then referred to the one with 12 grid lines in it, this is really looking at the same box split into 4 pieces. So one way I could estimate this is say, okay, estimate half, and here's half of that half, and here's half of that, and here's half of that, so it's a little bit above that. So it'll be mark it in half, mark it in half again, mark it in half again, mark it in half again. So if I did that, I could come over to the box that I'm drawing in. I'll just use this one. So here's this box. So I could estimate about halfway. And then say, well, it's a little bit above that. How much? Well, you know, half again, half again. That's where it is right there. Okay, same thing on the bottom. This is really the entire square that I'm looking at is really this. That's the grid that's drawn on the page. But when you look at the one with 12 grid lines in it, we can say, okay, now it's split up into quarters. So I could say, and if you could see it in the original, if you can see it on the grid that's broken up into 6, that's fine. We could estimate it. But in some ways, the more grid boxes you put on, the more accurate you could cite these lines. So if I estimated half here, that's where this is. If I estimated half again, not quite there. Half again, I know I'm a little bit to the left of that. So again, you'd estimate half, and then a little bit further than half, so I'm about here. So I know where I'm starting. I can see that this is a bit of an arc. It's not quite a straight line. Pretty close to being straight. So we could draw that in. And you could continue to cite these lines like that. Now it looks like, again, if really that's should be that. See, it's not quite straight, but even point to point, we could kind of put that in. It's a little higher than that. All right. So really, if I was doing this where it should be done, same thing over here. This is the 6 by 6 grid. So again, if you can cite it by looking at this original, so I can move this so I can compare it this way. Again, you'd sort of be looking at this and saying, if you can estimate halfway, again, it's fairly easy to break things up into halves and quarters and eighths. So I could say, well, if I estimate halfway here, that would be halfway across. There's quarters. So same thing. I'd say, well, you know, even if I'm estimating a quarter here, I know I have to start somewhat to the left of that. So I'd say, okay. The other thing you can do is, again, some of this is just training your eye to do this. If you can look at this and say, well, I know I'm a ways above half, I could say, okay, I'm starting here, and I'm coming up a ways above half, and I know that there's a bit of an arc to the line. Doing this on the computer like this, I'm to there. And then one of the most important things is looking at the shapes that get created. So is the shape that's in here the same as the shape that's in here? Is this triangle down here the same shape as what we're going to draw down here? So this looks like it's a little bit more than a quarter the way across here. So again, I estimate a half, I estimate a little bit more than a quarter, I'm here. I know it's not that, and I know it's not that. The angle has to match. So we can start to estimate that, and again, that's probably a little bit of a curve, but so this is a way to track the same thing. The next box up, you can sort of estimate halfway across, and there's a little shift to the left there, so estimate halfway across, and even by eye, we could start to say, okay, this happens, it's going down at a certain angle. And really what I'm looking at is the shape that's being created up in this area. So if I estimate this in, there's some other detail that's happening down in here. And even if I rough this in, there's some kind of fancier detail that's going on here. But I kind of know where I'm starting, which is up in here. And I'm coming down to here and creating this shape. And so you have to sort of look at these things and say, is the shape that's being created the same? You know, is this shape the same as this? It looks like this is a little small, so you may have to adjust. Until you get the shape right. It's always about putting in your best shot and then making some adjustments from there. Same thing here. This spoon, you have to distinguish between the spoon and the shadow here, of course, but you know, this is arcing up at whatever angle it is, gets to about halfway, and then it makes a little change up in here. This point's a little above halfway here. So even if you did this by eye, estimating that, I'm a little above halfway. Announcements. Right. That's coming out to about halfway, a little less than halfway. And obviously it's an arc. And then it's changing. Again, this is a bit of a generalization, but now it looks to me like that line should be somewhat steeper. There's a little more detail in there, but I'm getting closer. You can kind of step your way through this by doing that.